I went from a kid who grew up in sort of Hertfordshire, getting out into work, earning a paltry salary, finding a job as a financial analyst, and then eventually being headhunted by what became Thomson Reuters. There's a lot of gaps in what I've just described, but in essence, that's the arc of the story, of the journey. And that then gave me an opportunity to start to travel the world. This company that I joined had offices everywhere, but didn't have anything in the Middle East. And I basically built a plan to say, look, let me move to the Middle East in 2006, this was, to launch our first office in the region. So I moved there in 2006, which is in Dubai, set the company up in the Dubai International Financial Centre, spent 2.5 years building the company and growing the company. Then we bought Reuters for $14 billion, and I ran sales for a part of the business in Middle East and Africa. And then a reorg happened 2.5 years later, so 5 years in total in the Middle East. Went to America and worked in the corporate headquarters and spent 8 years there with Thomson Reuters, and then left and joined a private company and eventually came back to the UK. And the reason I say all of that is what struck me was how difficult these moves abroad were, not least because there's lots of logistical stuff to happen. You know, you've got to pack your house up and then you've got to move somewhere, but just the things that you don't really take that much consideration of when you're younger. I did that first move in my 30s. I left the UK having all of my medical information in the NHS, moved to Dubai. Suddenly nobody knows me. I've got to, if I see a doctor, try and remember and recount the health history and tell them what had happened, and, you know, had some, you know, stuff in Dubai, etc. Then moved to America, had the same problem again. 5 years worth of data in the UAE, not transferred to the US, spent 11 years in total in the US, generated, you know, data, medical information, not only for me, but for my wife, Helen, had a son in the US. And then in 21, we moved back to the UK. And again, the same thing happens once again. We've got medical history now scattered around the world. We're not connected to it. It's best buried in an email where I may have a scan or something or a lab result, but I don't have access to it. I'm not empowered to take control. And that was the reason for launching Vitaspan, just to bring all of that data together and put people in complete control over all of their health information. But the other sort of underlying reasons, which I'll sort of come on, one was something that particularly happened to me, and then other things that happened to my broader family. So the thing that happened to me is, whilst in America, just transferred to the US, I'd basically taken on a quite high profile job, very stressful. It was leading a sales group, and our mission was to basically usurp the competition, the number one competitor in the marketplace. We had a new product. It didn't behave as we expected it to, and the market didn't react in the way that we wanted it to. Right, pressure. Yeah. And this is a new team designed specifically to achieve that task. The environment was toxic. You know, people weren't working collaboratively. The product wasn't delivering as expected. Customers weren't buying it. It just cranked up more and more pressure. And what that led to is, for me, a sort of a breakdown in terms of my equilibrium, because things were out of balance. And what happened specifically was I developed eczema, and this eczema was very, very severe. And it was around my face, around my sort of the shaving area. And being in frontline sales leadership, it was hugely problematic, because I've got to be on stage, you've got to speak to people, I've got to always be publicly visible. And so that led to even more stress and anxiety. And I was beside myself thinking, you know, what on earth can I do about this? How can I treat this problem? As much like anyone does with eczema, we all get told it's incurable. There's nothing that you can do about it. And the only thing that you can do is manage it with steroids and meds, basically.
Yeah. That's the common way people go, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's very, very unfortunate. That's the sort of the path, because it absolutely is. And I'll come on to the how in a few minutes, or certainly from my personal experience, the how. But I went to see a dermatologist in New York, quite a fancy one, who was on Central Park South. So my insurance covered it at the time, which was great. I didn't have to pay because the fees were ridiculous. But the first thing he said to me is, sorry, it's incurable, and we just have to manage it with steroids. There's nothing you can do in the long term to alleviate it. And the consultation lasted about 10 minutes at most. He didn't really ask that many questions. He went into his back room and he came back with a syringe and injected me with it. And it was steroids. Right, okay. And he said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to manage it with steroids. And I didn't really have much time to process what that meant. and, received it and then went away, and it went. And I was
You
thinking,
didn't give him time to say, well, let me think about it. Nothing like that.
not really, not enough time to sort of question it. And because I was probably in such a desperate state, I was very vulnerable to anything. So I'm giving up my agency, my control to a expert, and not really giving myself enough sort of time to listen to my intuition. It was just desperation, right? Somebody's telling me there's nothing they can do, but they can help me manage it. Well, managing it's better than nothing. So, okay, here's my arm and put this steroid in. And it went. And it went for about 4 weeks, and then it roared back with a vengeance. Like, it was absolutely, can't describe how bad it was. My life was falling apart. I couldn't sleep, was in constant pain. And it not only just sort of spread to my face now, it was across my entire body. And it was excruciating. I was falling apart, basically. Couldn't go to work, had to be off work for periods of time. And it was just awful experience. And then I gave myself some time. Well, actually, thankfully, my wife gave me some time. She went back to England and said, look, you've got to try and figure this out. We're going to go back to the UK for a little bit, give you some time to figure out what to do. And so in that time, it had some sort of space to think. And somehow, I don't know how, but I sort of remembered something that I was using when I was younger, because I'd always suffered from a shaving rash as a young kid, and it'd been sort of in and out with this sort of condition and trying to manage it. And I'd gone to see the GP in my sort of early teens, and they said, it's a shaving rash and it's got infected and we need to give you antibiotics to solve that. And they did, and then it went. And we'll give you something called Batraban, which is a sort of an antiseptic cream, and that managed it. It sort of staved off the infection, because at that point, thinking of it as an external problem. So it's infected, that's an external problem, and it's not an internal thing. It's nothing to do, I didn't put the link that it's something to do with my immune system or something being out of balance. It was something external impacting me. And therefore, this rash was caused by problems external. Put the cream on, take some antibiotics, and it had gone. But the thing that had given me more respite than anything I'd found was acupuncture. And I didn't really know at the time when I started using it, which is about sort of 15, 16, why it worked. I knew a little bit about the meridians and the electricity flow, but I didn't know much else about the mechanics and what was physiologically happening. But I used it and it seemed to work. So whenever this reoccurred, rather than go and see the doctor and have antibiotics from that point, I'd always go to see an acupuncturist and see if I could manage it through that process.